I am Isabella, 34 years old, an elementary school teacher who has been married to James for 8 wonderful years. At least that is what I thought until our anniversary dinner at Le Chateau, the fancy restaurant downtown. Family and friends surrounded us as we celebrated our milestone, but nothing prepared me for what happened when James stood up to make his toast. The gift box he brought contained something that changed our marriage forever. I still remember the shock on everyone's faces when I finally decided to stand up for myself. Where are you watching from? Hit that like and subscribe button to join me through life's unexpected turns. Trust me, you would never guess what happened after that disastrous party. Meeting James was like finding the missing piece to my puzzle. I was 26, working as a third-grade teacher at Pinewood Elementary, when our paths crossed at a charity auction for children's literacy. He was 28, confident in his tailored suit with a charming smile that lit up the entire ballroom. When he outbid everyone for a signed first edition of my favorite childhood book just to introduce himself to me, I knew he was special. James worked in finance, a portfolio manager at a prestigious firm downtown. He had this natural charisma that drew people to him. Tall, with dark hair and deep blue eyes, he could command attention in any room. His sense of humor was what initially attracted me to him. He always knew how to make me laugh, even after the most challenging days in the classroom with 20 hyperactive 8-year-olds. Our early days together were like something out of a romance movie. Surprise picnics in the park, handwritten notes left in my purse to find throughout the day, and weekend getaways to the coast. For our 1-year dating anniversary, he surprised me with a trip to Europe. We spent 2 magical weeks exploring Paris, Rome, and Barcelona. On our last night under the stars, on a private boat tour along the Seine, he proposed. "Isabella," he said, getting down on one knee as the Eiffel Tower sparkled in the background, "you have brought more joy to my life in 1 year than I ever thought possible. Would you make me the happiest man alive and marry me?" The wedding was intimate, just 60 of our closest friends and family at a charming vineyard outside the city. My parents, who had been married for 40 years, beamed with pride as they walked me down the aisle. My brother Michael and his wife flew in from Seattle. James had his college roommates as groomsmen. Sarah, my best friend since high school, was my maid of honor. We moved into our first house together 6 months after the wedding, a charming craftsman with a small garden where I planted tulips every spring. Those early years were filled with weekend DIY projects, adopting our rescue dog Bella, and building traditions like Sunday morning pancakes and Christmas Eve movie marathons. But tiny cracks began appearing in our perfect picture. The first time I noticed something was off was during a dinner party with James's work colleagues. He told a story about how I had accidentally shrunk his favorite sweater in the wash, exaggerating the details to make everyone laugh. I smiled through it, but felt a twinge of discomfort at being the punchline. These incidents increased in frequency. At first they seemed harmless. James would tease me about my terrible sense of direction, or playfully mimic my excitement when I talked about my students. I brushed it off as his way of showing affection. After all, my father often joked about my mother's cooking, and they had a rock-solid marriage. "He just shows his love through humor," my mother said when I mentioned it during one of our weekly phone calls. Men sometimes tease the ones they love. It is their way of being affectionate. So I learned to laugh along to be a good sport. I told myself that marriage required compromise, and if this was James's way of connecting, I could adapt. But over the past 2 years, something shifted. The teasing developed a sharper edge. James began commenting on my weight when I would reach for dessert. "Are you sure you want that? Those pants were looking pretty tight this morning," he would say with a smile that did not reach his eyes. He criticized my wardrobe choices, suggesting certain items made me look frumpy, or like a stereotypical teacher. The comments about my habits became more frequent too. The way I organized the dishwasher, how I folded laundry, my habit of reading before bed with a small light while he tried to sleep. None of it met his standards. Then came the incident 3 months before our anniversary. We had invited his work friends and their spouses over for dinner. I had spent the entire day preparing a complicated pasta dish from scratch, following a recipe I had been perfecting for weeks. When I served it, James took one bite and announced to the table, "This is why we usually eat out, folks. Isabella tries, bless her heart, but some people just are not meant for the kitchen." The table fell uncomfortably silent. I felt my cheeks burn as I stared down at my plate. Sarah, who had come with her husband Brian, quickly changed the subject, but the damage was done. Later that night, when everyone had left, I tried to talk to James about how his comment had hurt me. "You are being too sensitive," he said, not looking up from his phone. "It was just a joke. Everyone thought it was funny." "I did not think it was funny," I said quietly. "It felt humiliating." He sighed dramatically. "This is exactly why I cannot tell jokes around you anymore. You take everything so personally." I went to bed that night feeling like I was the problem. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I needed to lighten up. But a small voice inside me wondered if this was really what marriage was supposed to feel like. As our 8th anniversary approached, I saw it as an opportunity to rekindle the spark that seemed to be fading from our marriage. I wanted to recreate the magic of our early days to remind James of why we fell in love in the first place. Perhaps a special evening could help us reconnect and bridge the growing distance between us. I made a reservation at Le Chateau, the upscale French restaurant where James had proposed to me after our dessert course years ago. Getting a table was not easy. The place was booked months in advance, but I called in a favor from a parent of one of my students who knew the owner. I secured the corner table by the window, the very same one where James had gotten down on one knee. Finding the perfect gift took weeks of careful planning. I wanted something meaningful, not just another tie or cologne set. I remembered how James had been admiring a particular vintage watch at an antique shop we had visited during a weekend getaway last fall. He had lingered over it, commenting on its craftsmanship, but ultimately decided it was too extravagant. I returned to that shop 3 times before finally making the purchase. It stretched our budget significantly, but seeing the gleaming timepiece nestled in its velvet box made my heart flutter with anticipation. I imagined the look on his face when he opened it, pictured him wearing it proudly at work, telling colleagues it was a special anniversary gift from his wife. The week before our anniversary, I spent hours shopping for the perfect dress. I wanted something elegant but not overly formal, sophisticated but still youthful. I finally found it, a deep burgundy wrap dress that flattered my figure and brought out the warm tones in my hair. I scheduled an appointment at the salon to have my hair styled, something I rarely indulged in. The morning of our anniversary, I woke up early, my stomach fluttering with nervous excitement. I left a card on James's nightstand before heading to work, a simple note expressing my love and looking forward to our special evening. When I returned home that afternoon, the card remained unopened, pushed aside to make room for his phone charger. "Are we still doing dinner tonight?" James asked casually as he flipped through mail at the kitchen counter, not looking up. My heart sank a little. Had he forgotten? "Yes, our reservation is at 7. For our anniversary," I added, watching his reaction carefully. Right. He nodded, still focused on the mail. 8 years. Huh? Time flies." His lackluster response dampened my enthusiasm, but I pushed aside my disappointment. Maybe he was just preoccupied with work. Maybe he had something special planned that he was not revealing. Maybe he would be more excited once we were actually at the restaurant. I took extra care getting ready that evening, applying my makeup with precision, spraying the perfume he had given me last Christmas. When I emerged from our bedroom, James was already dressed in his suit, scrolling through his phone on the couch. He glanced up briefly. "You look nice. Should we take separate cars? I might need to swing by the office afterward to pick up some documents." On our anniversary, I could not keep the hurt from my voice. He must have heard it because he quickly backtracked. "Kidding, just kidding. Of course not. Let us take one car." He stood and grabbed his keys, ready to go. As we drove to the restaurant, I tried to engage him in conversation, reminiscing about previous anniversaries, but his responses were short, distracted. He seemed more interested in the sports radio playing softly in the background. Just as we were about to arrive, his phone buzzed with a text message. Ah, good, he said after reading it. The gang is already there. The gang? I asked confused. What gang? Oh, I invited a few friends to join us. Hope that is okay. Thought it would make the evening more fun. My carefully planned intimate dinner for two was suddenly transforming into a group celebration. I swallowed hard, fighting back tears of disappointment. You invited people to our anniversary dinner without asking me. James rolled his eyes as he pulled into the parking lot. Come on, Isabella. Do not make this into a big deal. It is just dinner, and these are our friends. Besides, I thought you would appreciate not having to make conversation with just me all night. He laughed, as if he had made a joke. I sat silently trying to process this sudden change in plans. Then my phone pinged with a text from Sarah. Just got to the restaurant. Surprise James invited us to celebrate with you. Hope that is okay. If not, we can make an excuse and leave. Sarah, always intuitive, must have sensed this was not what I had planned. I quickly texted back, "It is okay. Please stay. Could use the moral support." As I put my phone away, I noticed James was watching me. Was that Sarah? She mentioned she might be running late. She is already there, I replied, forcing a smile. Let us go in. I tried to tell myself that this could still be a special evening, even if it was not what I had envisioned. Perhaps celebrating with friends would bring out the best in James. Perhaps this was his way of making the anniversary more memorable. But as we walked toward the restaurant entrance, I could not shake the feeling that once again my feelings had been disregarded, my efforts unappreciated. Still, I held on to hope that the evening might surprise me in a positive way. Walking into Le Chateau felt like stepping into a dream. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the dining room. Each table was adorned with fresh flowers in silver vases, white linens, crisp and immaculate. The soft notes of a piano drifted through the air, mixed with the gentle murmur of conversation and the occasional clink of fine china. Under different circumstances, it would have been the romantic setting I had imagined. But as the maitre d' led us to our table, I saw not the intimate dinner for two I had planned, but a long table set for 12. Sarah and her husband Brian were already seated along with my parents and my brother Michael with his wife. That much was a welcome sight. But James had also invited 4 of his colleagues from work, including Andrew and Thomas, who always encouraged his most boisterous behavior. There were also 2 couples I barely knew, friends from James' racquetball club. Surprise, James announced, gesturing to the assembled group, as if he had orchestrated something wonderful. I figured 8 years deserved a real celebration. I forced a smile as I greeted everyone, accepting hugs and congratulations. Sarah squeezed my hand a little tighter than usual, her eyes asking silent questions. My mother looked confused, probably wondering why this intimate family milestone included virtual strangers. Isabella, darling, you look beautiful, my father said, kissing my cheek. That color suits you perfectly. At least someone had noticed my efforts. James was already at the far end of the table, laughing loudly with Andrew and Thomas, a glass of whiskey in his hand. I hadn't even seen him order it. James said he wanted to make tonight special, my mother whispered as she helped me into my seat. Though I must admit, I thought it would be a smaller affair. So did I replied, trying to keep the disappointment from my voice. The waiter came to take our drink orders. I requested a glass of champagne, clinging to the idea that this was still a celebration, even if not the one I had planned. As I sipped the bubbly liquid, I watched James hold court at his end of the table. He had always been charismatic, the natural center of attention. In our early days, I had loved that about him, how he could light up a room, make everyone feel included. Now I noticed how his attention rarely turned to me. When it did, it was often to use me as the punchline of a joke. Isabella was so nervous about tonight she tried on 8 different dresses, he announced to the table, as if I would notice the difference between any of them. His friends laughed. Sarah did not. Neither did my family. The appetizers arrived, delicate plates of escargot and pâté that I had specifically chosen during my planning call with the restaurant. James raised an eyebrow. Snails, really, Isabella? Not everyone has your eccentric tastes. The restaurant is known for its traditional French cuisine. I explained quietly. And you used to love escargot. Did I? He looked genuinely confused. Must have been pretending to impress you during our dating days. More laughter from his end of the table. I focused on my food, trying to savor the flavors despite the knot forming in my stomach. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah across the table. You okay? I gave her a small nod, though we both knew it wasn't true. Throughout the main course, James continued checking his phone, barely participating in the conversations happening around him, unless it was to interject with a joke or story that centered on himself. The few times he included me, it was to point out something I had done wrong or to contradict something I said. Isabella thinks her new principal is out to get her, he announced when I was telling my brother about challenges at work. She thinks everyone is out to get her. Paranoid, this one. I felt myself shrinking smaller with each comment, each dismissive gesture. This wasn't the man who had once written me love poems, who had held me when I cried over losing a student to a move across country, who had promised to be my partner in all things. When the waiter brought out the box containing the vintage watch, my gift to James, I felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps this would remind him of our connection, of the thoughtfulness we once showed each other. James opened it with curious fingers, lifting the timepiece from its velvet nest. There was a moment, brief but real, where genuine appreciation crossed his face. This is actually quite nice, he said, sounding surprised. It's the one you admired in that antique shop in Wilmington, I said, smiling. I went back for it. For a second, I saw a glimmer of the old James, the one who noticed and appreciated the small details. Then Andrew leaned over. Let me see that. Huh? Vintage, right? My grandfather had one like this. Real old school. He chuckled. Though I think most guys are into smartwatches these days. Count steps and all that. Just like that, the moment was gone. James slipped the watch back into its box with a casual, "Thanks, babe," and turned back to his conversation with Thomas. Across the table, Sarah caught my eye, her expression a mixture of sympathy and something else. Something like anger on my behalf. Next to her, my mother was watching with concern etched across her features. As the dinner plates were cleared, I wondered how quickly we could wrap up the evening. Maybe we could skip dessert, make our excuses, and leave. I could process my disappointment in private, figure out what to do about the widening gap in my marriage on another day. But then James stood up, tapping his knife against his glass, and my heart dropped. From the gleam in his eye and the encouraging nods from his work friends, I knew whatever was coming would not be good. The ringing sound of knife against glass cut through the restaurant, chatter drawing all eyes to James as he stood confidently at the head of the table. His cheeks were flushed from the 3 whiskeys he had consumed, and there was a particular gleam in his eyes that I had come to recognize over the years, a look that appeared whenever he thought he was about to be particularly witty. Ladies and gentlemen, friends and family, he began, his voice carrying throughout the intimate restaurant space. Thank you all for joining us tonight to celebrate 8 years of marriage to my lovely wife, Isabella. A round of polite applause circled the table. My parents smiled proudly, unaware of what was coming. Sarah caught my eye with a questioning look, and I managed a small shrug in response. 8 years, James continued, shaking his head in exaggerated disbelief. Quite an achievement, if I do say so myself. We have had our ups and downs, our adventures and misadventures. Remember when we first moved in together, and Isabella tried to assemble that bookshelf from Swedish furniture store without reading the instructions? A few chuckles rippled through the group. It wasn't a particularly cutting story, and I allowed myself to relax slightly. Perhaps this wouldn't be so bad after all. But seriously, James went on, raising his glass, marriage is about accepting someone completely, quirks and all. And Isabella, well, she has provided me with 8 years' worth of quirks to accept. The shift in tone was subtle but unmistakable. My stomach tightened as I recognized the familiar path this speech was taking. For instance, did you all know that Isabella has a very specific way of eating pasta? James looked around the table conspiratorially. She twirls each strand individually, counting to exactly 3 rotations before taking a bite. Not 2, not 4, but 3. It takes her 45 minutes to finish a plate of spaghetti. This wasn't even true. I had a habit of twirling my pasta carefully, yes, but the exaggeration made me sound obsessive compulsive. Andrew and Thomas laughed loudly while my brother Michael frowned slightly. And then there is her bedtime routine, James continued, warming to his subject. First the face cream that smells like a hospital. Then the checking of all doors and windows not once but twice. Then the reading of exactly 14 pages of whatever novel she is working through, no more, no less. Heaven forbid I try to initiate anything romantic after step one has begun. Heat crept up my neck, as several guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. My mother's smile had completely disappeared and my father was staring intently at his water glass. But the best quirk, the one that truly tests my patience, James said, his voice rising dramatically, is Isabella's unique way of expressing excitement. Ladies and gentlemen, when my wife gets truly excited about something, her voice goes up about 3 octaves, and she starts speaking so rapidly that she sounds like one of her third graders on a sugar high. He launched into an exaggerated imitation of my voice at a higher pitch, speaking at a frantic pace with wild hand gestures. Oh my gosh, James, you would not believe what happened at school today. Little Timmy finally learned to tie his shoes, and then Madison brought in cupcakes for her birthday. And then the principal announced that our class won the recycling contest. The mocking impression hung in the air for a moment before Andrew and Thomas burst into laughter. A few others joined with uncomfortable chuckles. Sarah's face had turned to stone. My parents exchanged worried glances. I sat frozen, my champagne glass clutched so tightly I feared it might shatter in my grip. Every muscle in my body was tense, my cheeks burning with humiliation. This wasn't a loving tribute from a husband to his wife of 8 years. This was public mockery disguised as humor. But that is not all, James announced with the air of a ringmaster preparing for his grand finale. In honor of our 8th anniversary, I have prepared a special gift that perfectly captures the essence of our marriage. He reached under the table and pulled out a gift box wrapped in silver paper with a blue ribbon. It was large enough to hold clothing, and a terrible suspicion began to form in my mind. Isabella has been asking what I got her for our anniversary, James said, grinning at his colleagues. The suspense ends now. With a flourish, he tore off the wrapping paper and opened the box. My breath caught as he lifted out a white t-shirt, holding it up for everyone to see. In bold black letters across the chest, it read, I survived 8 years with a nagging wife, with a caricature of a woman with an exaggeratedly large mouth below the text. The cartoon did not specifically look like me, but the implication was unmistakable. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Andrew let out a whoop of laughter, followed by Thomas and a few others from James's end of the table. But most guests looked stunned, uncomfortable, or outright appalled. Is not it hilarious? James asked, seemingly oblivious to the tension. I had it custom made. Without waiting for a response, he removed his suit jacket and began unbuttoning his dress shirt. My mother gasped softly as he stripped down to his undershirt in the middle of the fine dining establishment, then pulled the offensive t-shirt over his head. Ta-da! He exclaimed, turning in a full circle to show off his gift. What do you think, Isabella? Pretty, perfect summary of our 8 years together, right? All eyes turned to me. I felt the weight of their stares, some sympathetic, some embarrassed on my behalf, some simply curious about how I would respond. My throat had gone completely dry, my pulse pounding in my ears. I could feel tears threatening to form, but willed them not to fall. I would not give him the satisfaction of making me cry in public. In that moment, as I stared at my husband proudly wearing a shirt that mocked our marriage and belittled me in front of friends and family, something broke inside me. But surprisingly, what broke wasn't my spirit, it was the chains of acceptance that had kept me silently enduring his increasingly disrespectful behavior for years. The restaurant had fallen so quiet that I could hear the gentle clink of dishes from the kitchen, and the soft piano notes from the corner where a musician continued playing, oblivious to the tension enveloping our table. James stood there in his offensive t-shirt, an expectant smile on his face, as he awaited my reaction, clearly anticipating either tears or a forced laugh, both of which would have confirmed his power over the situation. Instead, I slowly placed my napkin beside my plate and rose to my feet, my movements deliberate and controlled despite the trembling I felt inside. The chair scraped softly against the hardwood floor, the sound magnified in the hushed atmosphere. "May I say a few words as well?" My voice was surprisingly steady, though quieter than normal. James looked momentarily confused, as if this response had not been in his script. "Of course, babe," he said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "The floor is yours." He sat down the offensive t-shirt still proudly displayed and picked up his whiskey glass with a smirk. I took a deep breath, looking around at the faces watching me. Sarah gave me a subtle nod of encouragement. My mother's eyes were filled with concern, my father's with a mixture of sadness and something that looked like pride. "First, I want to thank everyone for coming tonight to what I had hoped would be a celebration of love and partnership." I began, my hands clasped in front of me to hide their slight tremor. 8 years of marriage is indeed a milestone worth honoring. I turned slightly to address the whole table, not just James. When I met James, I was captivated by his confidence, his humor, his ability to light up a room. I fell in love with a man who seemed to see the best in me, who made me feel special and valued. Our early years together were filled with respect, adventure, and genuine affection. James was still smiling, though it had faltered slightly. He clearly hadn't expected a heartfelt speech. "I have treasured our journey together," I continued. "The small apartment we first shared, the house we bought and made our own, the traditions we created. I have been proud to be James's wife and to build a life with him." I paused, gathering courage for what came next. But somewhere along the way, something changed. The playful teasing that was once mutual and good-natured became one-sided and hurtful. The man who once told me I was beautiful began pointing out my flaws. The partner who promised to always have my back began using me as the punchline for his jokes. The smile had completely disappeared from James's face now. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, glancing at his colleagues, who were suddenly very interested in their dessert plates. I have spent the last few years making excuses for this behavior, telling myself it was just his sense of humor, that I was being too sensitive, that this is what happens in long-term relationships. My voice grew stronger with each word. But tonight has made me realize something important. There is a difference between loving humor and cruelty disguised as jokes. There is a line between playful teasing and public humiliation. I gestured to the t-shirt he was wearing. "This is not a gift that celebrates 8 years of love and partnership. This is an object designed to mock me, to diminish me, to get a laugh at my expense from people who barely know me." James attempted to interrupt. "Isabella, come on, it's just a joke. Everyone knows I held up my hand, surprising myself with my boldness. "I'm not finished." The table fell silent again. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small box wrapped in deep blue paper with a silver ribbon. "This is what I had planned to give you tonight," I said, placing it on the table between us. "I spent weeks thinking about what would be meaningful, what would show you how much our marriage means to me." With steady fingers, I unwrapped the package myself, opening the box to reveal a soft gray t-shirt neatly folded inside. I lifted it up for everyone to see. On the front was a beautifully printed photo of us on our wedding day, our faces alight with joy and promise, with the simple words, 8 years of love, written in elegant script beneath. "This is how I see our marriage," I said softly, "not as something to survive, but as something to cherish." I placed the shirt back in the box and looked directly into James's eyes, which now showed confusion and the first hints of shame. I deserve better than to be the target of constant criticism and mockery. I deserve a partner who builds me up instead of tearing me down for laughs. I deserve respect, especially in front of the people we love. I picked up my purse and wrapped my shawl around my shoulders. "I am going to spend tonight at a hotel. I need some time to think about whether this marriage is still healthy for me. Because while I still love you, James, I have realized tonight that I also need to love myself enough to set boundaries about how I am treated." I turned to address our guests. "I apologize for ending the evening this way. Thank you for coming to celebrate with us. Please enjoy the rest of your desserts and coffee." With that, I walked away from the table with my head held high despite the tears that had finally begun to slip down my cheeks. As I reached the restaurant entrance, I heard a chair scrape back and footsteps hurrying after me. I turned, half expecting, half hoping it would be James. Instead, it was Sarah, her eyes blazing with a mixture of concern and fierce pride. "I am coming with you," she said firmly, linking her arm through mine. "You should not be alone tonight." As we stepped out into the cool evening air, I felt a strange mixture of heartbreak and liberation. For the first time in years, I had spoken my truth without apology. Whatever happened next, I knew something fundamental had changed, not just in my marriage, but in me. The night air hit my face like a bracing splash of cold water as Sarah and I stepped out of Le Chateau's ornate entrance. My legs felt unsteady beneath me, adrenaline still coursing through my veins after what had just transpired. The valet attendant rushed forward, but Sarah waved him off. "We are going to walk a bit first," she explained, still holding my arm firmly as if afraid I might collapse. Once we were a safe distance from the restaurant, she turned to me. "Isabella, that was the bravest thing I've ever seen anyone do." The tears I had been holding back finally spilled over, streaming down my face in hot rivulets. "I cannot believe I just did that," I whispered, my voice catching. "I cannot believe I just walked out on my husband on our anniversary." "He walked out on you long before tonight," Sarah said firmly. "He just did it in ways that were harder to call out." We found a bench in the small park across from the restaurant and sat down. I buried my face in my hands, my emotions swinging wildly between empowerment and terror. What had I done? What would happen now? 8 years of marriage, and I had just publicly drawn a line in the sand that could not be uncrossed. What am I going to do now? I asked, more to myself than to Sarah. "First, you are going to come stay at our place tonight," she said, already pulling out her phone. "Brian will bring your overnight things from your house. I will tell him what to pack." "I should get a hotel," I protested weakly. "Absolutely not. You need to be with people who love you right now." My phone started vibrating incessantly in my purse, a series of incoming texts and calls that I was not ready to face. When I finally looked at the screen, I saw 6 missed calls from James, 2 from my mother, and 1 from my brother. There were also multiple text messages, the first few from James, ranging from angry, "How could you embarrass me like that?" to pleading, "Please come back, we need to talk." A text from my mother simply read, "We are so proud of you, sweetheart. Call when you feel ready." That one brought fresh tears to my eyes. Sarah called an Uber to take us to her house. As we rode in silence, I stared out the window at the city lights, blurring through my tears, feeling both utterly lost and strangely found. By the time we arrived at Sarah and Brian's cozy townhouse, I was physically and emotionally exhausted. Brian was waiting for us, concern etched on his kind face. "James showed up at your house when I was getting your things," he said carefully. "He seemed pretty upset. I told him you were staying with us tonight and that he should give you some space." "Was he angry?" I asked, suddenly afraid. "More confused, I would say. Like he genuinely does not understand what happened." Brian handed me a small duffel bag with my essentials. "I grabbed your toothbrush, pajamas, and clothes for tomorrow, and your anxiety medication just in case." I thanked him, touched by his thoughtfulness. Sarah showed me to their guest room, where I sat on the edge of the bed, feeling strangely disconnected from reality. "Try to get some sleep," she said, squeezing my shoulder. "Everything will look clearer in the morning." But sleep eluded me that night. I lay awake, replaying the evening in my mind, questioning if I had overreacted, wondering if I had just destroyed my marriage over a thoughtless joke. Yet each time I pictured James standing there in that offensive t-shirt, expecting me to laugh along with my own humiliation, I felt the rightness of my response reaffirm itself. Around 3 in the morning, I finally reached for my phone again. 22 missed calls from James now. Numerous text messages that evolved from anger to concern to desperate apologies. "Please come home. I am worried about you. I am sorry about the shirt. I thought it was funny. Everyone else is making it a bigger deal than it is." I do not understand why you are doing this to us. There was also a voicemail from my mother that I listened to with trembling fingers. Isabella, honey, it is Mom. I just wanted you to know that your father and I support you completely. What James did tonight was unacceptable. We have been concerned for some time about how he speaks to you, but we did not want to interfere. Call us tomorrow when you are ready. We love you, sweetheart. Tears rolled down my cheeks as I listened to her message twice more. I had not realized they had noticed the dynamic shifting in my marriage, that they had been worried. Somehow knowing they had seen it too validated my feelings in a way nothing else had. The next morning, Sarah made us coffee and toast, which I picked at without much appetite. My phone continued to buzz with messages from James, alternating between apologetic and defensive. I finally texted him simply, "I need space to think. I will be in touch when I'm ready to talk." My parents called, and hearing their voices broke something open inside me. I sobbed as I described how things had gradually deteriorated, how I had tried to convince myself it was normal, how last night had finally made me see I could not continue this way. "You deserve to be cherished, not mocked," my father said firmly. "No man who truly loves a woman treats her the way James treated you last night." Over the next few days, I took a personal day from work and stayed with Sarah and Brian, trying to sort through my feelings and decide what to do next. James continued calling and texting, his messages growing increasingly desperate. On the third day, I agreed to meet him at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee. He looked terrible, with dark circles under his eyes and hair that had not been properly combed. For a moment, my heart ached for him despite everything. "Isabella," he said, standing as I approached. He moved as if to hug me, but seemed to think better of it when he saw my expression. "Thank you for coming." I sat down across from him, maintaining a physical and emotional distance. "I am here to talk, James. That is all." He nodded, fingers fidgeting with his coffee cup. "I am so sorry about the t-shirt. It was stupid and thoughtless. I never meant to hurt you." "It was not just the t-shirt," I said quietly. "It was everything leading up to it. The constant criticism, the public teasing, using me as the punchline for your jokes, making me feel small so you could feel big." "I was just joking around," he protested, though with less conviction than I expected. "That is how my family always was. We teased each other. It was how we showed love. But it stopped feeling like love, James. It started feeling like contempt." I met his eyes directly. "Do you even like me anymore? Because sometimes it seems like you do not." The question caught him off guard. He blinked rapidly, genuinely surprised. "Of course I like you. I love you. You are my wife. Being your wife does not automatically mean you respect me or enjoy my company, and respect is essential for love to survive." We talked for over an hour, really talked perhaps more honestly than we had in years. James admitted that his work friends encouraged his behavior, that he felt pressured to be the funny guy in their social circle. He acknowledged that he had crossed lines repeatedly. "I want to fix this," he said, finally reaching across the table, though not quite touching my hand. "I want us to be us again." I took a deep breath. I want that too, but not the us we have become. If we have any chance of saving our marriage, we need professional help. I think we should try marriage counseling. The old James would have scoffed at the suggestion. This James, faced with the potential loss of his marriage, nodded soberly. "If that is what it takes, I will do it. I will do anything, Isabella. Please just come home." "I am not ready for that yet," I said honestly. "I need more time, and I need to see real change, not just promises." As I walked away from the coffee shop that day, I felt a strange mix of sadness and hope. Our marriage was hanging by a thread, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. 6 months after that disastrous anniversary dinner, I sat in our therapist's office for what had become our weekly routine. Dr. Martina Jenkins, a compassionate but no-nonsense marriage counselor, had been guiding James and me through the painful process of rebuilding our relationship from the ground up. Isabella, would you like to share your reflection from this week's exercise? Dr. Jenkins asked, her gentle voice filling the comfortable office space adorned with plants and soothing artwork. I opened my journal where I had been recording my thoughts as part of our therapy homework. This week I noticed that when James complimented my new haircut, my first instinct was to brace for a follow-up joke or criticism. It made me realize how deeply that expectation has been wired into me. But there was no joke, just the compliment. It felt strange, but good. Dr. Jenkins nodded encouragingly. And James, what observations did you make this week? James shifted in his seat, still sometimes uncomfortable with the vulnerability these sessions required. I caught myself about to make a joke about Isabella burning the toast on Sunday. It was automatic, like a reflex. But I stopped and asked myself why I felt the need to point out a minor mistake that did not matter at all. What was I trying to gain from that? That is excellent self-awareness, Dr. Jenkins noted. Were you able to identify the underlying motivation? James nodded slowly. I think I used humor to feel superior, to get validation from making others laugh at someone else's expense. It had become such a habit, I did not even question it anymore. The road to this level of insight had been long and difficult. After that night at the coffee shop, James had initially agreed to counseling more out of fear of losing me than genuine understanding of the problems in our marriage. The first few sessions were tense, with James defensive and me withdrawn. It took nearly breaking down completely during our third session for James to finally confront some uncomfortable truths. Dr. Jenkins had asked him to explain why he thought the anniversary t-shirt was funny. It was just a joke, he had insisted repeatedly. Everyone gives gag gifts sometimes. But what specifically was meant to be humorous about it? Dr. Jenkins pressed. What was the joke? James had struggled to answer without sounding callous. I guess that marriage is hard sometimes, and wives can be demanding. So, the humor came from presenting Isabella as a burden to be endured, rather than a partner to be cherished, Dr. Jenkins had said plainly. Hearing it framed so bluntly had caused something to crack in James's defensive armor. For the first time, he seemed to truly see how his behavior looked from the outside, how it had made me feel. He had put his head in his hands and whispered, "What have I been doing?" That moment had marked a turning point in our therapy. James began to explore the roots of his behavior more seriously, uncovering how his father's similar treatment of his mother had normalized disrespect disguised as humor. He started to recognize how his insecurities at work had led him to seek validation through put-downs, particularly from colleagues like Andrew and Thomas, who reinforced toxic dynamics. The hardest part for me had been rebuilding trust. I had moved back home after 3 weeks of separation, but with clear boundaries. We slept in separate bedrooms at first. I insisted that certain friends, particularly those who had encouraged James's worst behaviors, not be invited to our home until our relationship was on firmer ground. Some of James's friends had fallen away naturally when he stopped joining in their mockery of spouses and colleagues. Andrew had actually called James whipped when he declined to participate in their usual banter during a work happy hour. That comment had been illuminating for James, helping him see the unhealthy dynamics he had been perpetuating. I told Andrew that respecting my wife does not make me whipped, it makes me a decent husband, James had reported proudly during one session. He did not know what to say to that. There had been setbacks along the way. Old habits resurfaced under stress. There were arguments and tears and moments when I questioned whether our marriage could be saved. But slowly, with consistent effort, things began to change. James learned to express affection without mockery. I learned to state my boundaries clearly instead of silently enduring discomfort. We both worked on healthier communication patterns, on rebuilding the friendship that had once been the foundation of our love. For next week, Dr. Jenkins was saying, bringing me back to the present. I would like you both to reflect on what you have learned about yourselves individually through this process. Not about each other or the relationship, but about yourselves. As we left the office and walked to our car, James reached for my hand, a gesture that had once been automatic, but now felt meaningful again. I was thinking, he said hesitantly. Our 9th anniversary is coming up next month. My body tensed slightly at the mention of anniversaries, the memory of last year's disaster, still sharp despite the healing we had done. James noticed my reaction immediately, another sign of his growing awareness. I know not the best association now, but I was thinking maybe we could reclaim it. Do something simple, just the two of us. No gifts, no big gestures, just being together. I squeezed his hand, appreciating the thoughtfulness of the suggestion. I would like that. Our 9th anniversary was nothing like our 8th. We spent the day hiking at a nature preserve, something we had enjoyed doing when we first dated. We had a picnic by a lake, talking easily about everything and nothing. That evening we cooked dinner together at home, moving around the kitchen in the comfortable rhythm we had nearly lost. There were no grand speeches, no presents, no audience. Just two people choosing each other again with clearer eyes and more honest hearts. My journey back to myself had been as important as our journey as a couple. I had started practicing yoga, finding strength and peace in the mindful movement. I had rekindled friendships that had fallen to the wayside during the years I had retreated into my unhappy marriage. I had begun journaling regularly, recording not just my thoughts about therapy, but my dreams, fears, and hopes for the future. Most importantly, I had learned to listen to that small voice inside that recognizes when something feels wrong, when a line is being crossed. I had learned that setting boundaries was not selfish, but necessary, not just in my marriage, but in all relationships. The greatest lesson from that painful anniversary night was not about James, or even about our marriage. It was about my responsibility to myself to honor my own worth enough to speak up when I was being diminished. To recognize that love should never require you to make yourself smaller. As James and I moved forward, rebuilding our relationship day by day, I carried that knowledge with me. Whatever the future held for us, I would never again silence my voice or shrink myself to avoid rocking the boat. I had learned that standing up for yourself while terrifying in the moment opens the door to authentic connection that would never be possible through silent endurance. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do in a relationship is to be completely honest about what hurts us, what we need, what we will not accept. Sometimes love requires the courage to risk losing someone in order to find the truth of who you both really are. I do not know what the coming years will bring for James and me. I know there will be more challenges, more moments that test our growth and commitment to change. But I also know that I will face them as my full self, never again accepting disrespect as the price of love. The woman who stood up at that anniversary dinner, who walked away with her dignity intact, despite her breaking heart, gave me a gift far more valuable than any anniversary present. She showed me my own strength. She reminded me of my worth. And for that, I will always be grateful. Have you ever had to set a difficult boundary in a relationship? Have you experienced that moment when you finally decided enough was enough? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more stories about navigating life's challenging moments. Remember, sometimes our most painful experiences lead to our greatest growth. Thank you for being here with me today. And remember, you deserve relationships that help you shine, not ones that dim your light.